Hello? Hello? Oh, there we go. All right. Hello. I'm going to invite our panelists to come on up here while you catch your breath. As I said, we are not feeding you so that your brain experiences intermittent fasting. So Nina Moore, come on up here. Nina's going to talk. She is a TRX teacher here at Equinox, and she's going to talk on the panel about the benefits of exercise. Dennis Selkoe, my great friend, sit down anywhere here, is at Brigham Women and Harvard. Rudolph Tanzi, a superstar also. I like to say that he's the Rose and Joseph Kennedy chair. Yes, that's true. That's true, but he's much more than that. But you can sit right here. That's okay. My great friend Mark Hyman, I don't know, he was in the class, so he's probably wiped out in a bathroom somewhere. Yeah, I saw him breathing really heavily. And Nancy Lombardo, Nancy Emerson-Lombardo, she was also in the class. She's with him in the bathroom. Wow. Oh, no, she's also recuperating or getting changed or something like that. Okay. So before I want to thank you guys so much, and you, Nina, for coming here. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank those incredible teachers. How great were they? That class is called Metcon M for the mind. It's going to be offered all through the month of June, which is Brain Awareness Month here at Equinox. So you can tell your friends to take it. It's the first of its kind. A lot of research went into that class about memory, about blood flow to the brain, because as I have traveled and as they will tell you, everybody says if you're concerned about your brain health, concerned about your memory, the first thing you should do is to exercise, hence the name of this event, Move for Minds. Movement. We have a very sedentary lifestyle, so the goal of this was to make it fun. Number one, to make it challenging. As she said, if you're not challenging, you're not growing. And to make it about community, because we do know that isolation and loneliness is a path towards cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's. So we're trying to build community. That's why you're all here together. I'm a big believer in having fun and playing and in exercising. And so that was the goal of all of that, and to make you remember certain things, and then that lovely little math thing at the end, which I really didn't like. And you are really in good shape. Yeah, I really liked that some of us were in the corner and could do our own thing over there. So Mark Hyman, who always tells me he's in incredible shape, is clearly not, I don't know what happened to him. I saw him, what? Someone should go check on him? No, he's a doctor. I think he's okay, but I think we should just probably go ahead without him, and then he can join us. So anyway, we are also being joined by a large Facebook audience. We are streaming this conversation live, so people, I think about 25,000 people joined us yesterday online, so I'm going to be kind of cognizant of what we talked about yesterday and try to make this a little bit different. Yesterday we focused a lot on women's brains, perimenopausal women's brains, menopausal women's brains. You can go look at that if you're interested in that. We'll talk a little bit about it, but since we are one day later, I'm going to try to mix it up a little bit. And I want to start with Rudy here. No, I'm actually going to start with Dennis, I said, because Dennis and I first met when I did the Alzheimer's Project on HBO. It's a big 5-part series. You can still watch it. It's called the Alzheimer's Project. And I met Dennis then, and the results of these events also fund some work that Dennis is doing along with Ann Romney here in Boston, which is why we're here. And we've also funded some work with Rudy, which is also why we're here. But Dennis told me back in 2009 that a cure was in a vial somewhere around the corner. And I've been quoting him since 2009, and I'm getting kind of tired of it. So I want to ask you, Dennis, where is that vial? Oh, Mark, you're here. Okay, Mark Hyman. we were worried. You took a shower? That's not fair. Oh my God, that's not fair. I hope you didn't eat.
No, I didn't eat.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so Dennis, go ahead.
Maria, thanks for bringing us all together.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me all right? Yep. Good. Okay. And I did not do the exercise this morning.
That's
I'm
okay.
very sorry about that. And so I've forgotten where I put the vial.
No.
But, take a look at me. I mean, I think who really needs to do the exercise, my buddy Rudy here.
I exercise a lot.
Let's get him out there. And
red wine. The
he
red
doesn't
wine
know where
gets
the
me.
vial is either. So the answer to your question is, the vial is actually being administered now to thousands of people around the world in clinical trials. So, the whole world thinks that we are far away from a treatment for Alzheimer's. I don't think that's true. Everybody has their own opinion. Science is very complex, but I think we have that vial in the form of an antibody that's being given to about 2,900 people in 30 countries right now. So that is the trial I'm talking about that Biogen is running, and it's in phase 3. They just added 850 patients to the trial. And so we can debate endlessly how that trial will turn out, but we will know for sure in the middle of 2020. And so for a long time, people like Rudy and myself and our colleagues at the MGH, at the Brigham, and all around the country have tried to figure out how Alzheimer's starts. And many of us think that the most likely thing is this amyloid protein builds up in areas that are important for memory. And if we could lower it, that would be good news. And this vial of magic medicine called aducanumab, which a colleague of ours had to do with the development of, stems from the research that we've done, Rudy and I and many others over the years, that amyloid is the bad guy and needs to be cleared from the brain. And so right now, I enrolled another patient in the aducanumab trial Friday, a friend of mine for 40 years who's developed MCI and now has really borderline Alzheimer's. So I think the answer
MCI is mild cognitive impairment.
So I think the answer is we have a lot to do. There's a lot of work left to do. We're working on it around the clock and around the world. But I think if my wife or I had this disorder now, I'd want to be in this particular trial because I think this antibody can clear amyloid. In fact, we know it does. It's just remarkable that in 6 months and a year in their phase 1 trial, they cleared amyloid plaques from the brain quite dramatically. Some people have been on it for 5 years already. There's thousands of folks who've taken this, and their level of amyloid plaques, as we measure them by PET scan, is almost non-existent. Now, will that help their thinking?
I was just going to ask
That's the
this.
key thing.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. We don't treat the biomarker or the X-ray. We want to actually get the amyloid out and see if it helps. And in their phase 1 trial, in just 165 people, there was a flattening, a lack of decline in memory scores and mentation. And so will that small trial, phase 1B, translate into a big hit when Biogen announces their work in 2020? And we don't know for sure. But as I say, I can't give you any better recommendation than if my dear wife, Polly, who's not here, who should have been here this morning to exercise, but we walked the Arboretum early in the morning. I do love my wife, and I do want good things for her. So I want her to be in this trial if she ever needed it, because the drug looks like it's about the best in the world at clearing amyloid plaques.
But Dennis, everybody, and I say this in the larger scale, has heard about these promising trials many times when it comes to Alzheimer's, and then when they get right to the kind of finish line, boom, they fail.
And the big reason for that is a scientific one. For example, Lilly had a trial of a so-called gamma secretase inhibitor, and it didn't work even in animals before it went into trial. So there's so much hope on the part of doctors and companies to try to put things forward that they try things that aren't that great. Rudy and I know about a little company called Myriad Genetics out of Utah that tried a drug called arfluiprofen, which is a type of Motrin, essentially, or Advil. It failed. And then there was Alzheimer that failed, and there was Lilly's solanezumab, which is an antibody, that failed. It got actually a 15% less decline, which is something, but not enough to get an FDA approval. So the answer to your question is every single trial failure has a specific reason for it. And the main reasons are we started too late. We started patients who are already in moderate disease rather than mild or very mild. And we also had drugs that didn't work very well, like the one from Lilly, which was gamma secretase inhibitor, just was not a good drug in the beginning.
Rudy, we were talking, and I said to you, I want you to tell us where we are right now. What do we know today in June 2018 that we didn't know last June 2017? And you said you're more excited today about the research, about the possibilities than you have ever been. Why?
Yeah, there are reasons. Dennis and I have agreed on the cause of Alzheimer's. We've known each other 35 years. And by the way, this is all muscle, by the way, Dennis. Just so we can take that outside. But anyway.
Oh, guys. Men. Okay.
Just don't look at the belly.
Boys, come on. We want to talk about why we're excited about our minds. Let's go. Okay. Gentlemen.
I'll keep my jacket on.
Whoa.
So anyway, I think the issue is, for most of these trials, you see failures. Dennis pointed out some of these drugs just weren't very good, but some of them did clear amyloid well, but it's used too late. We now know that amyloid plaques accumulate 20 years before symptoms. And, you have plaques that's causing the tangles to form inside of the nerve cells. The nerve cells are dying. And then there's neuroinflammation. The brain is reacting against this pathology and pockets of cell death with neuroinflammation. And many of us believe that that's the key factor that kills many, many more nerve cells. So by the time you're treating someone with full-blown Alzheimer's with a drug that hits amyloid, I look at it as amyloid's like the match, the tangles are like the brush fires, the neuroinflammation's the forest fire, and you're trying to put out a forest fire by blowing out the match. And so aducanumab, they're betting, hey, if you blow out that match early enough in these very mild early patients, that maybe they'll see cognitive improvement. But like Dennis said, the phase 1 trial was tiny, and whether this will work in a large phase 3 trial, we'll see in a couple of years. But meantime, we have to think about other approaches. And that's where I'm excited, because our lab and other labs have recently identified over a dozen genes that control the neuroinflammation. And I think this is where you can best help a patient who has dementia right now. So by targeting genes with names like CD33, which we found, TREM2, which was found in Iceland at Decode Genetics, you can get an idea of how to take these cells in the brain called microglia that normally are like housekeepers, cleaning amyloid up, especially when you're in deep sleep. They clean the amyloid out.
That's why they're just important, because I want to stress the importance of sleep.
Yes.
Because it is a time and meditation where the brain can clear itself, right? Okay,
And during exercise as well.
Right.
Exercise, you make an enzyme that clears the amyloid, and it also quells inflammation. During exercise, you induce the growth of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, which is where Alzheimer's hits. So all these things are great. But the thing is, with inflammation, how do you curb that? We've only had, you have to have targets. You have to have drug targets. And these inflammation-related genes, we've only had for about 10 years now, 5 to 10 years. But now we're seeing, right here in Boston, there's a company called AZ Therapeutics, which I'm involved with, that has a drug that's repurposed, an approved repurposed drug, that's aimed at the neuroinflammation. And they're doing a phase 3 trial. And, it's too early to say anything, but, based on just interim analyses to see how things are going, it's going well. So
you said you'd never seen anything going quite this well.
Yeah, as a scientist, you always say it's when something's that, you don't want to get too excited until it's
until
finished.
You can get really excited.
Right. But but anyway, it's looking interesting. So I think at the end of the day, like Dennis said, you'll be hitting the plaques early on. You're going to have early intervention for the plaques. But for people who have Alzheimer's now, you don't give up hope. I think we have drugs now, at least in trials, that will hit that key component of neuroinflammation. And one other thing why I'm excited is the FDA announced new guidelines in February that now will allow us to do trials with drugs on plaques where you simply have to lower plaques or simply lower tangles and not have to improve cognition in full-blown patients with those same drugs. And that opens the door now for different types of approvals for drugs that hit the pathology before symptoms without having to do a 10-year prevention trial that a lot of folks wouldn't want to do.
So their FDA is making the process faster.
Yeah, we can comment more on that, but I think this is a huge, one of the reasons I'm so excited is, hats off to Scott Gottlieb, the new head of the FDA, for now being open-minded to if there's a safe drug and it hits plaques, let people take it, and then let's see 5 or 10 years out if it's working, rather than doing a 10-year prevention trial no farmer will do because it costs $10 billion, and by the time they're done, they're off patent, and they don't want to do it.
So many people come up to me, Rudy, and say, my mother, my wife, my husband, my father, et cetera, was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Can I get them in a trial? Is there anything I can do? They're 65, they're 70, and you're saying they can join this trial today?
Well, there's there's recruitment criteria they have to meet. But I
Right.
think,
But where do they find out about it?
well, there's different sites. I work with the Cure Alzheimer's Fund, and they provide guidance. The Alzheimer's Association provides guidance. If you're adventurous, you can go on clinicaltrials.gov and look up Alzheimer's and find trials there. But there are recruitment criteria, but many of them, like the one Dennis was mentioning, Biogen, you have to be very, very earlier stages. Some of these other ones that are hitting neuroinflammation, you can be more moderate.
So
If you have someone that you love that has this disease now,
Right.
you want to go to a specialist. It could be a geriatric psychiatrist or a geriatrician or a neurologist at a major medical center and get into one of these trials. And you can find them at the Alzheimer's Association. Is probably the easiest place to find the names of the trials. And you just need a specialist to sit with you and your loved one and decide which trial would be good for you. But we really encourage people to go into trials and not sit back. And the earlier you are in the process, more likely it's to work.
Be
So,
proactive.
Wanted to add, the Alzheimer's Association has a program with NIH called Trial Match, and that program helps you either on the phone or online match yourself. And we really are not recruiting enough people to Alzheimer clinical trials of all kind, whether it's for prevention, for caregivers, for early stage or MCI. And I brought a bunch of cards from the Alzheimer's Association are out in the resource table about Trial Match.
so I want to go to Mark because Mark and I are old friends, and Mark is actually treating patients and working with people, integrative doctor. So many people, Mark, tell me, I go to my doctor for my physical, they never ask me about my mind. I go in and I say I have some memory issues. They tell me it's stress, not to worry. I talk to what I call kids of Alzheimer's who are like me, who, when their parents said, I'm having some memory issue, we discounted it. And if I've talked to one child of Alzheimer's, I've talked to 1,000 who said, I wish I hadn't done that. Doctors don't seem, and particularly when it comes to women, to be aware of memory issues, honest to God, and they definitely don't, when they talk to women, have any understanding, from my experience, of women's hormones, of what women are going through, the changes in their body, the changes in their mind. And people say, I don't even know if I have Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment because my doctor doesn't even know.
True. First of all,
That's scary.
yeah, it is scary. First of all, I just want to thank you for having me and for being on the panel with Dennis and Rudy, who, are giants in the field, and I'm a humble practitioner. And, they know a lot more about this than I do, but I come at it from the clinical perspective, which is seeing real people every day who are suffering with these issues. And I think, one of the questions we have to ask is, are we thinking about the problem in the right way? Are there things we can do to reduce our risk? Are there things we can do to optimize our brain function? Are there things we can do to change a trajectory if we have early Alzheimer's? And I think, or dementia. And I think part of the problem is a thinking problem. And Rudy said this in a lecture I saw him give a number of years ago, which is that there are patients who have brains full of amyloid, completely full of amyloid, but are completely normal in their cognition and memory because they have genes that prevent them from mounting an inflammatory response. So they can't create inflammation. So what we're doing typically in medicine, why we've had hundreds of drug trials and billions of dollars spent, and 99.6% have failed, and the last drug approved, I think, was in 2003 maybe with Namenda. We're struggling because we're looking at the wrong end of the stick. I think we're looking at the downstream effects of all these insults to the brain, which results in amyloid and plaques and tangles, but we're not looking at the root causes. And those are things we have enormous capacity to look at and change. And the data may not be really robust, but there's suggestive data that diet plays a big role, that exercise plays a big role, that stress plays a big role, that sleep plays a big role. These are things you don't have to wait for a 20-year randomized controlled trial to start to do. Yeah. And then there's sort of layer down, which are what are the insults to the brain? And I just started treating people by focusing on getting their health overall optimized and crossing my fingers and seeing if it would impact their brain. And it really seemed to have enormous impact. And many patients I've treated with dementia and Alzheimer's. And it was a surprise to me, because in my training, it was like there's nothing you can do. Once you got it, that's it. It's just a downhill trajectory. But by addressing, for example, insulin resistance in diet, which is prediabetes, which 1 in 2 people have, by addressing sources of inflammation, whether it's the gut. We now know, for example, that our view of the body is completely changing from a reductionist diseases to understanding the body as this dynamic, complex system. We talk about dementia or Alzheimer's, but in reality, there's no such thing. There's the same common end pathology and symptoms, but the causes and the ways of getting there may be different depending on the individual. For some, it may be severe insulin resistance. Some, it may be their gut microbiome driving inflammation, which is now, we realize, one of the most impactful things that drives inflammation. It could be environmental toxins. It could be nutritional deficiencies. It could be
But Mark, so many doctors aren't kind of educated on that, and that's not the
Right.
conversation
It's not what we
that
learned.
doctors are
Right.
having with
Right.
people on the front lines. I hear it every time I travel. I go through the airport. I'm on there. People go,
It's
I
true.
can't get a doctor. What kind of doctor?
Because we're not trained in personalized medicine. We're not trained in systems thinking. We're not trained to deal with these root causes. We're trained to look at diseases as these entities, the things that you catch that you need a drug for. And that there may be drugs like Rudy and Dennis are talking about that are going to have an impact. But think of it like this: if you're having there's a rule we use in functional medicine called the TAC rule. If you're standing on a TAC, it takes a lot of aspirin to make it better, right? So you can take all the Advil you want if your brain's inflamed, but if you're eating something or there's some diet factor or toxin or other factor that's driving inflammation, you have to deal with that. If you're standing on 2 TACs, just treating one won't make you 50% better. So you have to deal with all the things that are driving brain dysfunction. And that's really the systemic thinking that we don't learn in medical school, and that is just now becoming into the sort of space of medicine, but it's not something most doctors know how to do. And that's what functional medicine is. It's an attempt to try to coalesce that data into coherent strategies to work with people.
So many people I talk to now, and they say, they're really interested in longevity. We have a lot of young people talking about biohacking and ketosis and diet, and I'm going to intermittent fasting, and that's the best way not to get Alzheimer's, and exercise will make it that I don't, or brain training. And do you buy into all of that?
Well, I think in terms of lifestyle, your health is first your own responsibility. I mean, in the books that I write with Deepak, we tell you that the choices you're making today are going to determine where you are tomorrow, and where you are today was based on the choices you made yesterday. So you can always make the right choices now.
But people don't know that in terms of their brain. I mean,
Right.
certainly we're always told to make choices so we don't get fat.
Yeah, but I mean,
but not about our brain.
But I like to use the acronym to shield your brain. So S is sleep, 8 hours. H, handle stress, meditate. I, stay social, and so interaction. I, E, exercise. L, right now, learn new things. Unless we're putting you to sleep, and then we're still helping you. And then and then diet, meaning take care of your gut microbiome, which means fiber. I mean, people think about probiotics, but prebiotics are probably more important. Just a good as Nancy will tell you. Nancy taught me everything. I know about diet. But, good diet and Mediterranean diet. So, I mean, those choices every day is where your health starts. You don't want to have to get to the point that you have to go see Dennis.
And Maria,
or Mark.
you actually helped us enormously about the gut microbiome connection, because one of the grants that you raised through this process that you've led, Move for Minds, has allowed Lori Cox at the Brigham to make remarkable connections between what exactly is in the GI tract and what the likelihood is of getting the Alzheimer process in the brain. So I think we all would agree that.
Can you explain that, Dennis, to people?
Yeah. So what Maria and her colleagues have helped us do is to understand people who have Alzheimer's, especially the earliest stages of it, what changes about their GI bacteria, essentially. As you know, we have enormous numbers of organisms that live on us and with us and that are healthy, that on our skin and everywhere in our body. And so we figured out that certain bacteria become abnormal when the inflammatory process that Rudy has studied and mentioned earlier kicks up around the amyloid plaque. So I continue to believe that the amyloid buildup is the earliest pathological event that we can see, and many people, I think, agree with that, and Rudy and I agree with that too. But then after that, that amyloid does its dirty work by inflaming local cells, and that has an effect on the GI flora as well, and vice versa. Some people have a particular constitution of bacteria in the GI tract that makes them more likely to respond with inflammation to amyloid. So that has been a tremendous thing that you've really helped us do, Maria. The other thing I would say for everyone in the audience is that the number one thing you'd love to do is to choose your parents very carefully. And there's no doubt that genetics is a powerful determinant. And the bacteria in the gut is the environmental part. So it's both nature and nurture. We can't choose our parents carefully. We are what we inherited. But we can start in middle age to reach out and do more exercise, be more careful about nutrition, avoid the kinds of things that give diabetes and metabolic syndrome, and very much stretch our minds. So doing what you're doing now, things that you're not that familiar with, that you don't think about every day, is what you want to get involved with. So getting into book clubs and getting into a variety of more complex intellectual activities, another very good thing to stave it off. How long before I get Alzheimer's disease will I have had to do that? Well, probably 20 or 30 years maybe. So for some of us, there's not that much we can do right now. Still, we want to exercise, we want to stay healthy, we want to do good nutrition. That may be helpful as well. But the most important thing is to tell our adult children that in their 30s and 40s and 50s, if there's any family history of Alzheimer's disease, that's the time they want to really take good care of themselves and wear their bicycle helmets when they go riding, things of that sort. So there's a lot of things to do to try to make this less likely. Once it starts, I do think we need sort of Western medicines at that point in the early stage of real memory impairment, when you don't remember where you parked your car in the morning. That's when you have to get to a specialist, get to the Alzheimer's Association, and get into a trial.
Nancy, you have done so much work. Rudy just said you've taught him everything. Wow. A lot.
Yeah.
But
Going way
talk
back.
a little bit about, because there seems to be, and Mark actually wrote a book recently, What the Heck Should I Eat? There's so much confusion. And everybody, by the way,
Good book.
has their book on sale here afterwards, and you can speak with them. And he also has a best-selling book. So, there is so much confusion. I myself am always confused, and then I put my hand into some place that's probably not good.
Jar.
Sugar, yeah. So you wrote a book about that too. So tell us, though, we hear about intermittent fasting. We hear about putting our body into ketosis. We hear about not eating sugar. We hear about the Mediterranean diet. But what should we be doing? And also the other thing that I hear a lot of times from a lot of women who are my age who have parents in assisted living facilities, and the diets in the assisted living facilities are horrendous. And so people come up to me all the time and say, can you fix the menus in the assisted living place? I'm like, no, you do it, because your parent is in there. I'm trying to do this. So, but I think it's, what should we eat, and how can people who have parents in assisted living places fix those guidelines?
Well, you've asked a lot of questions. I actually believe that we can start with babies and pregnant moms. I have 2 granddaughters now, 9 months and almost 3. And my daughters learned to feed them totally brain-healthy foods right from when they first start eating solid foods at 6 months after breastfeeding.
Sardines for babies?
Sardines, beans, lentils, dal, mushrooms. They eat everything because babies naturally have a big palate. But
Wow.
anyway, then berries, of course, are great for all of us, and babies love berries. You might have to squash them for them before they have teeth.
So start your baby early, but what
Yeah.
about us babies here?
Well,
We're not so
okay.
like...
Well, then their mothers are now in their 30s and 40s. That's the excellent time, for, as Dennis was saying, for us to begin protecting our brains. And actually, Rudy mentioned why exercise is so great. It helps you grow new brain cells while quelling inflammation, while reducing amyloid. And every brain-healthy food that's been looked at in the lab or in a clinical trial also lowers the amount of inflammation and beta amyloid.
But do you
in the
believe in
brain.
this concept of intermittent fasting?
I like that idea. I know Richard's Isaacson as well. He's originated that idea, I think. And
That's,
and I
so we just
really
explained
like it.
having
Yeah.
your body not eat for 12, 14, or
No,
16 hours.
Between your last meal, that means your last snack of the day, and your first meal in the morning. I think that's very important, but it's also important, as Mark has written about, avoiding sugar and insulin resistance. That's probably, I tell people, if they can start with one thing, that's reducing the amount of sugar and refined carbs that they're taking in, because it wreaks havoc with your brain directly as well as the rest of your body. And then there's so many, and luckily trans fats are supposedly out of the U.S. food system this month. I hope it really happens.
Still in my hotel room.
Still in your hotel room. We'll have to enforce the law, but anyway.
But I
I had that black coffee
and
this
then,
morning.
and then
Yeah.
avoiding red meats and processed foods are the big things to do in terms of avoidance. But there's so many delicious foods that are good for us.
But we have to change the Western diet,
Yes.
really, because we
Right.
have more cases of
It's a
cognitive.
very inflammatory diet.
Yes. And so basically, the easiest thing for people to do is to try to reduce the amount of processed foods. And as with the MIND diet, the suggestion is the most important fruit is berries, which I'd agree with, but other fruits are also very helpful. And then your vegetables, just about every vegetable is good for you, and it has the prebiotics, as Rudy mentioned. Then you need your beans and your nuts and your whole grain. So it's a whole range of delicious foods that are great for us.
But not, for a lot of people in this room, not the diets they were brought up on, not
Right,
the
right.
diets that they fed their children. I have to call
Right.
myself
No-
out.
no
I was
apple
not
juice.
feeding
How
like
about
chickpeas
that?
to my kids.
Yeah.
I wasn't,
And
I'm
they
sorry to
love
say.
it, and little
No, I
babies
wasn't
love them.
doing that.
I
no.
know.
So,
I do it for my child when she was a baby? No, I didn't know about that.
yeah, so I think that, I'm always trying to figure out practical information. And
Yeah.
I want to come to you because you've done a lot of research about what is the right kind of exercise. Everybody says exercise, exercise, exercise for the brain. We just took a class that was really, that the people here at Equinox spent a lot of time formulating. What is the best exercise for those who are joining us via Facebook Live and Instagram? What should they be doing?
So we know that the biggest benefit of exercise, it increases oxygen to the brain. So the exercise needs to be of significant stimulation, and it's in generally interval-based training. So what does that mean? Interval-based training is a period of intense exertion followed by an alternating period of lower intensity or rest. The repetitive nature of interval training will allow and promote the increased circulation of blood flow to the brain and the increased blood flow of oxygen to the brain as well. So we know that really benefits the prefrontal cortex, where executive function occurs and our most basic decision-making happens. So it's important to do interval-based training, to do it regularly, and to make sure that you are allowing your body enough time to recover from that as well.
How do we get, we're talking here about choices, making babies brain healthy, talking to people in their 20s and 30s about their brain health so that they don't get Alzheimer's. Most young people think Alzheimer's is something that happens to somebody when they're 80. But they are interested in the concept of longevity, So how do we market brain health? How do we market what you do today if you're 20 and 30 is going to impact whether you get Alzheimer's? I mean, do we need to remarket this disease entirely?
Well, I think the advice we're talking about here, the advice that Mark has in his books and the books that I write with Deepak, we're putting it out there, but most of the people who read our books are older, and you don't get a lot of folks in their 20s who care about this. But when you tell them this fact, that by the time, someone in their 20s right now can probably expect to live till maybe up till 85 or older. Right now, lifespan's already close to 80. And at 85, depending on the study you read, it's anywhere from 30 to 50% of folks who already have symptoms of dementia. Never mind how many have the pathology that comes 10 years before dementia. So most people at 20 right now can expect to live long enough to have up to a 50% chance of Alzheimer's. To me, that's the kick in the butt you need to say, you know what? And you need to start at 20 or 30 years old with all of these things, from sleep to handling stress and meditation, staying social, learning new things, exercise, diet, everything. You need to start early, because where you're going to be at 40 years old begins with the choices you made at 20 years old. So getting that message out there that you need to start early on is the important thing.
Yeah,
That's what
You're doing it now,
you.
because when you look across this room, I calculated already that the mean age here is about 42. 42. I'd say the mean age is 42. And that means that a lot of you folks are concerned about this even prior to age 42. We have to talk much more about this. And I think the very campaign that you're leading, Move for Minds, needs to go all around the country. You're doing that already, around the world, and just talk about this. Of course, the world thinks this is a disease of elderly people, and it is. The older you get, the more likely it is that you get Alzheimer's disease. But the earliest case on record, I think, was 28 years old or so, a presenilin mutation. And even earlier than that, I know of one young lady who developed this at 18 when she was in high school, and she died ultimately of classical Alzheimer's disease. So the point is, the disease occurs extremely rarely at young age. As you get older, it's more and more likely. By the 50s, this is a real medical problem. It's not just the 80s. And you have to talk about it and make sure that young adults who see their parents worry about this also are concerned about it as well.
So we're going to open this to questions from the audience for everybody up here, but I just want to say that the point you were just saying, I now talk about this to my children who are in their 20s, who actually don't want to end up as caregivers for myself and or their father. I've just done a story that's going to be on NBC about the millions of millennials who are having to leave their jobs to care for their parents who have Alzheimer's, and anybody who's a caregiver in this space knows it's a 24/7 thing. So we have a huge kind of political problem, an economic problem, a financial problem, a cognitive, spiritual, emotional, every way problem. And that the more we talk, I think everybody in this room and everybody listening has the ability to be a reporter of this information to their children, to people in their 20s and 30s, because when I go out and talk to audiences, people are stunned that they should be thinking about this in their 30s or their 40s, and they actually think there's nothing they can do. So I think if you can remember some of the things that we've talked about here today: exercise, sleep, knowing your A1C, right? Stress level, which for women is a huge issue. It's really, as my kids say to me, you should stop your stress. I'm like, if I could, I would. I mean, I'm working on it. But so I want to, and anybody who have questions of these people up here who are so, you never get them together, so go.
Okay, Adriana Machado from the Brain Health Project in Florida. I have two questions. One about systems. So maybe to get the younger kids or adults to understand this, we have to teach complex adaptive systems in school and make sure that they understand what the human body is from start, right? And have a different perspective for life. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And Rudy, you in your book, you write about the power of music. And for people who already have the symptoms, listening to music when they were 13 to 25 years old, so the music they enjoy themselves with has a great effect. And today we're exercising. So my question to you is, if we combine music with exercise, so music from when we were happy with the exercise that we struggle to do, but we have to do, would we get synergistic effects?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, like I said before, it's a thinking problem. And I think if we look at the body as this dynamic system, we can begin to teach that to doctors, to nutritionists, to healthcare providers, to students, to everybody, and realize how much power we have. Yes, genes are important, but our genes haven't changed much in the last, 20,000 years, but we've seen explosions in dementia as well as autoimmune disease, heart disease, diabetes. So the environment is something we have control over. And it's certainly those things that are obvious, right? Diet, exercise, sleep, stress, but there's a whole other level of things that are driving the inflammation that's driving this, we have control over. And I see this, I really have huge respect for Dennis and Rudy, but I also think that there's a sort of a parallel universe of practitioners out there doing aggressive things for people who already have dementia. And I've had many of these patients who've been diagnosed, who have recovered, who have slowed it or even reversed it. And it's stunning to see this, and it always surprises me that when I do these things, they get better. But we're seeing the evidence that this is true. And I think if we can begin to work on things like the gut, we can work on things like aggressive dietary interventions, whether it's ketogenic diets, intermittent fasting. I mean, I had a patient with a ketogenic who had dementia diagnosed MCI over 10 years ago. She did really well. We treated her thyroid. We got her gut normalized. We optimized her methylation pathways. She had high levels of heavy metals. We addressed that. We optimized her overall nutritional status, and she went back 10 years in her function and then sort of declined after 10 years when her husband died. And I put her on a ketogenic diet, and she popped right back to awareness. And I see this on a regular basis. And so, we're seeing this not just in Alzheimer's, but, on the other end of the spectrum is autism. And right here in Boston, one of the leading experts in celiac, Dr. Alessio Fasano, is doing interesting work looking at leaky gut and permeability and inflammation that comes from the disturbance in our microbiome. And in autistic kids, there's also neuroinflammation. All these kids' brains are inflamed. So it's almost like autism at the young end of the spectrum.
Mark, let me just jump in where you say putting people on a ketogenic diet, and then you say we should not eat red meat, and then people who are on ketogenic diets are eating red meat.
Well, you don't have to eat a lot of red meat, and I think the meat question could take up a whole hour.
Right.
So,
But
I think there's mixed evidence on that. I think there a lot of it's observational. Processed meat seems to be a problem. I'm not convinced that meat itself is a big issue. But in this study with these autistic kids, they literally did fecal transplants and changed the cognitive function of these kids, changing their poop, which is stunning.
So people should be talking, to their doctors about alternative ways to deal with whatever issue they're coming into the doctor. And that, yesterday we were talking about women who are menopausal, perimenopausal, and doctors advising them to get neuroendocrinologists. And I'm like, where do you find one of them? I mean, where do you find a neuroendocrinologist? This is really kind of an issue, though, particularly I find for women who are told, now estrogen is a neuroprotective, but I was told not to take estrogen, because I'm going to get cancer if I take estrogen, but it's affecting my memory, and I'm irritable, and I didn't even realize that all of these changes in my body were actually coming from my brain, and who's going to help me, and I don't know what to do, and that's real. And it's not that, and I think it's really important.
That's the art of medicine.
Yeah, but I think it's really, women have been told they're crazy, they're hormonal, they're out of their minds, but it's their brains that are really changing, and doctors don't seem to be aware of it or take it seriously.
I want to let you know something. I have a gynecologist that believes in using hormones that mimic female humans' own hormones, and using it as a skin cream. I've been taking it for 2 or 3 decades, and it really makes a difference. And most of the medicine out there
What is that?
treating, well, it's actually based on soy hormones, but it's not.
It's actually something
not
somebody can buy?
Yes, and it's not.
Genistein?
It's a prescription compound. Yeah, yes, he knows the right
Genistein is one.
terminology.
What is it?
Genistein.
And it's not using the horse, Premarin
Premarin,
or
right.
stuff made from horses' estrogen.
No, but so
It's
people are
made
going to
from
ask
human.
about that. So could you explain
Right.
what that is exactly? Because
Well,
all of a sudden everybody's going to be going like,
What is the term? Bioidentical.
Yeah.
well,
which is-
bioidentical hormones.
So typically the hormones that were used in the studies that showed they were cancer were from horse urine. So they
That's
were
the White House
Premarin,
study.
pregnant mare's urine. That's how they got that. And that has adverse effects in driving inflammation, adverse effects on the liver, increasing metabolites of estrogen that are carcinogenic. And we know a lot more about estrogen metabolism now. So there are genes that regulate that. There's diet that regulates that. There's all sorts of factors that drive changes in the metabolism of estrogen. But in some women, you can use bioidentical hormones which mimic your own hormones. They're the same chemical structure, whether it's estradiol or progesterone or testosterone. And those can be helpful for some women, but I think you have to be very smart about how you use it and who you use it, what the risks are, if there's cancer risk, and monitor their estrogen metabolism. There's a whole series of steps that can be done, but typically most gynecologists don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Question.
So thank you for
I
explaining,
want to
but
answer her other question,
Yes,
or-
go ahead.
I have a message I just want to share with you. I want to make sure you all have a sense of hope, because what's happening now with lifestyle, and Mark has hinted at this, there's already clinical trials showing that exercise and diet can actually slow the underlying progression of problems in the brain, even with people with early Alzheimer's. We hope a drug will come along that's proven that will do it faster. But in the meantime, we already have lifestyle. And right now in the world, there are 7 different countries that are mounting multi-domain prevention clinical trials, including in the US. The US one is run by the US Alzheimer's Association, and they're about to start launching. And I think this is very hopeful. China, Singapore, the UK, Australia, us, Canada, and it all started in Finland.
The
So,
finger study, if you
with-
want to look
with
more.
Yeah, give a
nutrition,
Pelto.
exercise, social engagement, and keeping your minds active, as well as managing as best you can any cardiovascular or blood sugar issues. And in Australia, they're adding treatment of depression because that's another risk factor. And guess what? Australia has also come up with clinical trials that show within 3 months, people with depressive symptoms, even if they're on medications, can improve their mood to reducing depressive symptoms in just 3 months of turning to a Mediterranean diet. I mean, that's stunning.
That is done. Okay, go ahead, Rudy.
No, I'll give you a quick answer about music. I mean, it's remarkable that the music memory part of the brain is so spared as Alzheimer's travels through the brain. And music is a great way to activate synapses again, and especially music that you grew up with, the music you loved between, let's say, 12 and about 22 years old, the music that you go through all your trauma with.
You mean
know.
like the Platters?
Yeah. Oh, for you, Dennis, yes. No. But, stimulating the brain with that music is just a great way to awaken synapses. But also, there's some great work that was done, and I write about it in my last book by Langer at Harvard, who showed that if she took men who were in their 70s and put them into a house that looked exactly like it was, back when they were middle-aged. So everything, the TV, the appliances, the music, everything for a week.
Magazines.
Yeah, magazine. Everything was exactly the way it was when they were younger. And they tested them for cognitive and for various outcomes before and after, and they had a control group who didn't.
Muscle strength,
Right,
everything.
muscle strength.
Fitness.
Vision, posture, muscle strength, memory, everything improved remarkably. And I think those are the types of studies that we don't think enough about. That
Just
if you-
pretend you're 30.
Right, which I do anyway, but the idea is just, you don't have to listen to the Platters to do it, but if you
How about the Beatles?
Beatles are fine, yeah. No, but that's the whole point, yeah.
Yes, let's have another question. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, for $100 from 23andMe, you can get tested for Alzheimer's. Have you gotten tested, and do you recommend being tested?
Yeah, so just as a geneticist, let me just make the point that the type of testing you get from direct consumer genetics is not by any means perfect. We are still working in academia and medicine at a good genetic, reliable test for the most common form of Alzheimer's that strikes after 60 years old. We can do a pretty good job on genetics for early onset Alzheimer's, like the presenilin genes and amyloid gene. But most Alzheimer's strikes after 60. And there we know one major risk factor, ApoE, and then we have about 36 other genes that have been implicated. But the work to identify what exact mutations in those genes matter to do reliable testing is ongoing now. So any test you do now, just with ApoE, is incomplete. And the fear is that you can create false hope or even false panic by just only knowing that one variable. So I think you have to be very careful in terms of how you interpret a consumer genetic test, because we're just not there yet to do clearly reliable genetic testing.
Okay, Lisa, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to I know we're getting ready to wrap up, so I just wanted to, it was occurring to me that this isn't called the Women's Alzheimer's Organization or the Women's Alzheimer's Corporation. It's the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. And you're all part of that now. And so what I'm hearing is like, you're getting this bits of education, and it's not just something that you're like, oh, I now know that, and put it aside. And don't be overwhelmed by it. Like, this is about stimulating conversation with your doctors, with your friend, with your family. That's how this is all gonna change. And it's not that different than heart disease or cancer, right? 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, any of you, you don't think twice about going to the doctors and getting checked for heart disease, right? Like, what's my blood pressure? What's my cholesterol? Like, start asking questions of yourself and your physicians and your family about, is this good for my brain? So you're part of a movement. We want you guys to be our warriors out there. So take everything you're learning today and really like integrate that into your lives and help us spread this so that, you know, doctors didn't used to know how to treat cancer or talk to you about cancer, or if people had that, we didn't discuss it. And heart disease, people died of heart attacks so much more 30, 40 years ago. Like, this is all about awareness and conversation and becoming familiar with what was too scary to be familiar. So I just wanted to invite you all to carry this with you when you go home.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Lisa, thank you. I'm totally in agreement in that regard. My question at this point, though, has to do with ideology. So we're all talking about talk with your doctors, talk with your doctors. And I have to say, having practiced alongside of doctors for 35, 40 years, my question is, we can't keep saying talk to the doctors, because the reality is in my practice daily that I'm coming across primary care physicians who do not have any knowledge about this. They don't know how to scan, test for it, and the nutrition, absolutely no. And we can talk till kingdom come about behavioral interventions and medications that you all have been working on so long for so many years. But seriously, doctors sitting here, how are we going to make the changes in our medical schools? Because if we don't make a change there, where are we going? Our doctors are who people go to.
So I think we've started to do that. It's a very important point. And we are teaching students at Harvard Medical School, where I teach, and in many places around the world, to be much more cognizant of age-related changes, and that this is a continuum that begins very early in life. There are things that change in the Alzheimer brain that are reminiscent of development, actually. So in some ways, Alzheimer's is a return, in part, to an early stage in development. So we are beating the drums for that. But frankly, you know, it is up to the people as a whole to complain more that age-related diseases are not really given their full importance in our society. There's such a youthful-oriented culture and middle-age-oriented culture that we have to, at every forum we can, just as Lisa said earlier, speak about what we talked about this morning and how important it is and get the message out. We are doing it at the medical professional level at medical schools. There is more emphasis on geriatrics, nowhere near enough. And there is much more interest in genetics because of 23andMe and lots of other entities like that. When it goes into the commercial realm, then people start getting their genotypes, and that's scary. And if they know that grandma had a little bit of memory trouble when she was in her 80s, they're going to look at their genotype a special way. So it's going in the direction of being more concerned about nutrition, more concerned about the aging process, worrying about your genes. That's sometimes dangerous. I haven't gotten my genotypes. I don't want to really know about them. When it's time, I will. The fact is that all of these modern changes are leading to more sensitivity about the aging process and about an interest in Alzheimer's. I mean, Alzheimer's disease, when I got into this field, and even when Rudy did, was a complete unknown. You couldn't go down onto Washington Street and ask anyone, what was this disorder? So now everybody knows about it. There's a universal effort to try to do something about it. My personal opinion is that the big breakthrough, I always say to audiences, did you hear about the big breakthrough in Alzheimer's? They said, no, and we didn't hear about it. I said, you guys missed that? It was in 1979 when a few families, about 5 or 6 families, got together and created the Alzheimer's Association, actually out in Illinois. Jerry Stone, who came from my hometown, and now it's all around the world. And there's many other organizations that are allied to that. So I think we're getting there. I think we're taking it much more seriously. We just have to talk more about it.
Rudy, do you want to respond to that too?
No, I totally agree with Dennis, I think, we've talked a lot about what we need to keep track of and what we need to do for our lifestyle. I do like to use SHIELD as an acronym because it's easy to come up with all 6 things you need to do: sleep, handle stress, interact, exercise, learn new things, diet. But I think we haven't mentioned blood pressure, and one big part of that of healthy aging is the fact that your cardiovascular strength is going to affect your brain strength, and your cardiovascular health affects your brain health. So if you have high blood pressure, you're at more risk for a stroke or neurovascular effects. This is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's, and that's one of the easiest things you can do as you get older, is don't ignore the fact you need to check your blood pressure and manage that as well. But all of this comes down to just making the choice to make choices. So every single day, at every moment, you have to say, I have a choice as to whether I'm going to eat that other piece of bread or in my case, have that other glass of wine. I mean, the University of Bordeaux told us red wine is good for you, so.
Resveratrol.
Yes, I believe it. But I mean, I think it's all about choices every day and remembering to make the choice to make a choice and not just sitting back. You need to be proactive.
Yeah,
And Mark?
just quickly, I do think that it's a challenge because our medical system has been basically the same since the Flexner Report in the 1920s, and it's structured around reductionist disease, which is all we knew back then. If you have a headache, you go to the head doctor, but maybe the head problem's in your gut flora. So the whole paradigm is breaking down, and yet our traditional training and our organizational structure and our reimbursement model in healthcare is all based on this old model. So as these new discoveries are coming up, they're sort of, we don't know where to put them. We don't know how to do it, and we don't know how to actually design the system that actually trains doctors. It's tough. I mean, most medical schools have very little, if any, nutrition training, and if it is, it's sort of talking about malnutrition in the third world. And we're trying to put a bill through Congress called the Enrich Act, where we get $15 million to fund nutrition in medical schools. But that's just one tip of the iceberg, and I think it's going to require consumers to be active.
We have to say one thing, Mark, and that is that we are living longer. And so something's gone right. So there's a lot of misery and gloom about how we train doctors. And I agree with your points. We want to do better. But what we're doing today, we're energized to try to move the ball forward. The average life expectancy in 1900 was 49. Yes. And so something's happened properly. Even with all the environmental factors we have, we worry about plastics and estrogen disruptors. And the stuff that people were breathing in West Virginia in the 1880s was much worse than what they're breathing today.
But I think the question really is, we are living longer, but hence, how do we live
Well, a lot of
longer?
people are living healthier. I think you see it in all your families. You know of members of your families. Some of them have Alzheimer's, but not all of them have Alzheimer's or have a stroke. A lot of people are living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s and doing quite well. It's not good enough. I'm a physician, and I want to see it get much better. Yeah. But I think we have to balance it by saying, overall society, if you think of it in a long-term trajectory, something's been going right. And even violence. If you read.
But I have to say, Dennis, I'm out all the time on the street, and I can't tell you how many women in particular come up to me. They're squeezed as caregivers, they're working, they're stressed out, they're worried about their minds, they're worried about their brains. Their parents are a full-time job for them, so, and when they go to the doctor, they don't feel understood. They don't feel that doctors are equipped to handle.
They have to find a caring physician, and my daughter, my granddaughters, and probably yours, are able to find doctors like Mark who can connect to them and try to do something positive for them. So it's imperfect. It's got to be better than this.
Academic centers, we're following Mark's lead. At Mass General, we just started a Center for Brain Health.
That's a big compliment.
No, we are. There's the new McCann Center for Brain Health, which is just for people who are fine, who want to keep it that way, or people at risk, and how do you prevent disease. So you're seeing functional medicine, integrative medicine centers popping up everywhere.
That
so it's
is
becoming
huge.
more mainstream.
That is huge. And I'm going to have to wrap this up, but Mark is here with his book, which is a bestseller. Rudy's is also a bestseller.
So is yours.
And so is mine. Yes, that's true. And I've been thinking. But I want to end really with, we started by hearing from Greg O'Brien, a great journalist, who talked about what this is like for him and for his wife and for his family. And I want to end with this card. Judith, who is here, who I just met, whose husband died 2 months ago and of Alzheimer's, and wanted to be here and wants to be a messenger of this. And she gave me this card with her husband's picture on it, and I want to end it with a quote from him, and it says, "It seems a bit his name is Steve Johnson, and the quote says, "It seems a bit naive and silly to hope for a world full of love, but what else would be as fantastic and beautiful as a world of love? When we ask, who do you love, why do we not answer everyone? You must be willing to try. If we want a good dream to strive for, all of us together, let us make an effort unmatched in history. Let us love one more person and one more and one more. Love more, please. Love to embrace life with joy and wonder, to live each moment with faith and peace." And that's from Steve and her husband of 37 years, and she said it was bliss the whole time. I don't know. I don't know about that, but like I take her word for it. She says it's true. And there's nothing that is better for your brain and your heart than love. So good food. I want to thank these titans up here who have spent their morning to educate all of us. As Lisa said, every single person in here is a messenger. Please take this information, go out, complain more, find doctors who look at the entire body and mind. And if you are told that you're crazy or hormonal, go get another doctor. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.